I'm Steven. That's Tiffany. That's Erock. That's John. We're from Just Got Played, and we are gaming through mechanisms. So what does that mean? Well, in gaming through mechanisms, we're talking about mechanisms for board games. It's basically the way that you interact with board games, card games, etc. We like to, classify those things so we can talk intelligently about games when we're comparing them or whatever. So specifically in this episode, the mechanism we're focusing on is called time track. And that is basically a way to determine the player order. And the idea is that on your turn, you can skip ahead really far, sometimes as far as you want, to get something that you see out there that you want. But then when your turn is over, whoever is furthest back on the time track, it's their turn to go. So one player could get multiple turns in a row. Several people could go before you get a turn again. But that's because you chose to skip ahead and take something. So that is basically how that mechanism works. So now we're just going to tell you what are our favorite games that really utilize that mechanism. And then we'll tell you what the people's choice was. So, John, let's start with you. What is your favorite time track game?
I think I'm going to go with My Story. I have the two I'm saying today. My Story, I believe, is a game that is not published in the US yet. Hopefully they do bring it here, of course. But it's a very interesting game because it's about getting a job, furthering your career, creating a family. And essentially, it's a deck building game in which you're trying to build your tableau up and gain extra benefits on every turn. You're drawing extra cards, you're doing extra things. So very typical to what you would do in a deck builder. But the time track mechanism of it is really well integrated into it. Once you get 30, life goals start coming out, and you can try to grab the life goals and get extra points. Once you're 40, a different set of life goals come out. And on your turn, you can spend as much time as you want. You can spend extra time to make the action a little bit better. There's a lot of different options that you have. But if you do so, you get older, you lose access to your wild resource that you have on card. At 40, you lose access to the second one. So it takes the time track mechanism, which is really neat, and it marries it to this idea of you're getting older, you're changing over time, and what you're looking for changes over time. So the theme works really well with it. The time track works really well as an element. And it takes a deck builder and elevates it to something completely different because it adds those other mechanics on top of it. So my top pick is My Story.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting thematically in that game that you have to do one of these actions, and those actions cost you at minimum one time. You get older every time it's your turn, right? Which, makes sense thematically. This one is different from a lot of time track games because it's not like you're skipping ahead on the time track to take a specific thing, but you're using that time to get stuff that's out on the board because you can use time as a wild card, or some things just take more time, like getting a law degree or something, So, I not only is it a cool use of the time track, but it's also very thematically integrated time with the idea of, what you're completing in your life. So, yeah, cool. All right. So next in order on my screen, I'm going to go with Erock. Erock, what is your favorite time track game?
Hello. So, first of all, I just want to say there's not a whole ton of these. There's, 20 of them that are basically in mass circulation, give or take. And then there's a whole bunch of them that have obscure, never heard of.
You mean like My Story?
My Story?
The game from Taiwan?
Maybe like My Story. So I feel like this is kind of a small space that we're in here, but there are some good options in here. For my first pick, I'm going to go with a deduction game. It's actually one of my top deduction games, and that is the Search for Planet X. I like this game a lot. Fair warning to all those interested, there is an app, and that is part of the game. In fact, I think this one is more of I want to use my own phone for my turn and you use your phone for your turn game than a lot of the other app games are, where it's just kind of communal or you pass it around or whatnot. Because in this, you're basically getting your clues from the device. So you just in a nutshell, we're searching for the unknown planet X. All right, and it's the board is circular, which I'm sure one of these pictures coming up here is going to show. Pew, 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 pew. And you kind of go around that is the turn order time track, and at the same time, it's showing like daylight on the world, kind of. So it shows you what part of the sky you can see, and that changes, it like moves around as it goes as well. So it really limits you as to what you can actually look at. And what you're trying to do is find this planet. And it's a deduction game in that there are rules. Now, I don't remember them all memorized offhand, but for instance, there's a number of asteroids, there's a number of gas clouds, there's a number of completely empty sectors, and things like that. So you use the app to find clues to do things like, I'm going to search sectors 4 through 12 for asteroids. And it'll say, there's 2 asteroids in there. And I'm like, okay, cool. I know that 2 of the 6 asteroids I'm looking at, or looking for rather, are in this window. So it's a whole sequence of these kinds of things where you're asking the app questions, basically searching the sky with your telescope, and you're trying to find these specific things. And as the game goes on, then you're able to narrow down where Planet X is based off of all the other clues. The time track is how you take a turn in this, and different things can cost more or less time. Scanning the entire, everything that you can possibly see takes a lot of time. Or the other way. I think it's actually the other way around. I think it takes the least amount of time to scan this huge area, but it takes a lot of time to scan a really small area because you're really trying to pinpoint in. If I'm only scanning 3 sectors for something, I'm really getting some good information. If I'm scanning half the sky and it tells me, well, there's 4 asteroids out there, I'm like, well, great. Well, there's 4 asteroids out there in half the sky. So the more you narrow it down, the more time it costs, but of course, the better information you get. So it's basically a race to figure out where Planet X is before everybody else does. And then when somebody thinks they have it figured out, that basically ends the game. And at that point, everybody else can kind of guess where Planet X is or try to get points in other ways. And during the game, there's other ways to get points as well, such as if you know what's in a sector. All right, and I didn't mention this before, but each sector can only have one thing. If it has a cloud, it only has a cloud. If it has an asteroid, it's only an asteroid. It might be completely empty. But the point is, if I narrow down where something is, then I can mark that. And it starts as a hidden information where you just put a disk down, and then over time, it gets a little bit closer, and then your paper's basically published. And at that point, you check and see if you were right. And if you were right, you flip them all, and everybody that was in there is going to get bonus points. And the first people in there, person or people, are going to get extra bonus points for that. So even at the end of the game, if you're not sure where Planet X is, you can still be trying to figure out where the other stuff is to get some extra points at the end of the game by guessing that stuff correctly. So there's a whole lot of different ways that you can approach this. I really like it. I'm kind of a fan of deduction games anyway. I like that whole, trying to figure things out as you go kind of thing. So, and this one I really like. It's simple after you learn how to play, if that makes sense. Like you sit down in front of this board and there's an app and you're like, what's going on? And how do I figure this out? But as soon as you get it, you're like, oh, I get it. All right, now I know what I got to do. So, it ends up playing fairly fast. I wouldn't say it's, a half hour, but it's not one of our traditional 4-hour games that Babe and I like to play. So anyway, I've probably rambled on far too long about the search for Planet X.
I like deduction games, but I haven't played that one yet. So
add it to the list.
Add it to the list. Hey, you know what? I just as an aside, we were talking before we started recording about games that feature this mechanism. There's one that 3 of the 4 of us played together that has that mechanism we totally forgot about, was Aqua Garden. Yeah, remember that? Okay. Anyway.
I actually remembered it. It didn't make my list.
Oh, yeah. Well, Tiffany didn't list it as one she had played. Right.
That's true. But she's actually played my list. Search for Planet X also. She just doesn't remember the specifics of it. So if I got it out, she'd be like, oh, yeah, I remember that game.
Yeah, but she likes
these. When you describe it.
She likes these other games better. And speaking of, what is your number 1, Tiffany?
I have to say my number 1 for this one, I feel like it's kind of basic, but that's okay because it's a really good game. And that's the classic Patchwork. So this was the game that introduced me to this mechanism. And that was a long time ago. I would venture to guess that this was one of the first games that introduced it to gaming, it would had to have been one of the early ones because it just wasn't a popular thing. I'd never seen it before. And it's a fun 2-player game, and there aren't a lot of 2-player games that I like that it's like, I mean, you have to play with 2 players. It's not any more than that. It's not 2 to 4. It's not 1 to 4, 1 to 3. It's 2. So there aren't a whole lot of 2-player games that I really care for, but Patchwork is one of them. But you have a little piece of quilt, you have a square, and you're going along the time track trying to get patches of varying sizes and shapes to fill up your little quilt square. And the really hot commodities are the little 1x1s that fill in those odd places on your board. And you get those by crossing the line first on the time track. So it incentivizes being the first one to go into the next section because you get this little 1x1 that can kind of help you out where you maybe have messed up. But you also want to kind of hang back because then you get more picks, you get more turns and more opportunities to fill up your grid, your board. So it's a fun game that kind of challenges you to decide between, do I want this piece that's perfect for me, or do I want to give up this piece that's perfect for me, and then maybe go for the opportunity to get 2 or 3 even pieces that aren't as perfect, but help me kind of be the first person to cover up 7x7, which is another part of the game. If you're the first person to cover a 7x7, you get extra points for in-game scoring. So it's a fun game. It's pretty simple to learn. It's quick to play. But Patchwork is my number 1 choice for the time track mechanism.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good choice. A lot of the people in the People's Poll liked it too, but it just got edged out at the end. So spoiler, it is not one of the 2 people's picks.
Well, I'm glad you brought it up, Babe, because I would have been shocked and disappointed if none of us had mentioned Patchwork during this one. Yeah. Because for sure, that's a staple.
Yeah. My games are not staples. They're a little more obscure. So I'll just go ahead and list my first one, which is Kraftwagen. So Kraftwagen is themed on building cars. And this is like the dawn of the industrialization of building cars, right? There's famous people in the game like Daimler and Benz and Bentley and Porsche, right? The people, the guys. Mm-hmm. And there are cards that you can get in the game that give you certain benefits. But essentially what you're doing is you have certain things that you can do on your turn. You can do some research, which can give you better car bodies or better car engines. You can make an engine, you can make a body. You can put those things together to put a car with an engineer for sale. You can race your race car. You can decide which of the customers that you want to put into play. And that's actually the rather cutthroat part of the game because every round there's going to be a certain number of cars for sale. And when you put a car out for sale, it has a certain value engine and a certain value body, and it has a certain value of the engine number of engineers that you put on for like customer support or something, and then there's also a price that you put on it. And so there are different people that are going to buy cars that round. And so when you put out a person, it's just, well, this person is going to buy the car with the best engine and the rest doesn't matter, right? Even if it's the most expensive car out there, they don't care. They're just going to buy the one with the best engine. Or you might buy the one that has, the most engineers on it. Or some of them they'll buy the cheapest car, although you'll get double that in points value. So, you could be focusing on like, oh, I'm going to do this to make the body of my car good. And then now I'm going to make a body and now I'm going to make a car with the body. And meantime, people have been putting out other customers. And so your car with the really good body isn't even going to get bought that round unless you sell it cheap, So what makes this a time track game? So there are a bunch of little discs, and those discs determine what you can do on your turn. And at the starting setup, there are a bunch of them, and they are all just one thing, like build a body, do a research, get an extra engineer, whatever it is, right? And then a little further along on the track, the discs, there's some that are 2. And then lastly, I think there's one that's a 3. So you could jump ahead and take whichever one you want. And when you take one, you then move it to the end of the line. So that makes interesting. That's always changing. But then, if you jumped really far ahead, other people are going to get several more turns. So you could jump ahead to build, the car or whatever to get it out for sale. But then people behind you might be taking those actions and doing things like putting out customers that, aren't good for you. So there's definitely head-to-head competition on the racetrack where you're trying to get ahead to get the most points. There are these objectives. Whoever gets to them first gets those points, and everybody else gets nothing for achieving them. And then, of course, the cutthroat nature that I described about the competition to actually get your car that you put in the market sold that round. So those are the reasons that I really like Kraftwagen. I can't remember the player count right now. I think it goes up to 4. It can be a little tough at 3. Because you can get this sort of thing where, maybe one person is focusing on engines while another's focusing on body. And then what does that third person do? They're probably not competing with both. They're probably more competing with one than the other. And so it feels a little maybe not balanced great at 3. I still have fun playing it. But yeah, maybe 2 and 4 might be the sweet spot for this game. Anyway, I think I picked it up, one, because I like cars, but also because it regularly goes on sale. So, cheap games are the best, right?
Usually for sale.
Yeah, right. Sorry, I was losing my voice. Actually, so I'm going to kick it over to John for his second choice.
Yep, I feel like this one's probably going to be a popular pick because it's kind of an evergreen title that most people have either played or seen. And that's going to be Tokaido. There's something elegant about the design of Tokaido, all the way down to the box. The box is pure white, except for the logo on it. The board itself is just a straight line through, which represents the time track with little sections jutting off. The cards are beautiful. It's just really well designed with a simple elegance to it that really expands upon the areas that it does focus on. It's the first time track game that I played. It's one of the only ones I could probably name for a long time. And I think there's probably a lot of people too that have played this one as well. But it's just a very simple game where almost the entirety of the mechanism is the time track. You might be trying to do set collection of cars or visiting the springs or different things like that. But it's a game that's fairly easy to teach. It's good to get people into the hobby. It looks great. The theme matches what you're doing. And it's just a fun little game that's usually on the shelf. So it hits all those areas that I want and what I would consider to be a favorite because it has all those elements to it. And it's just a very classic design. It just has never seemed to go out of style. It's always one that you could break out and people are either going to be impressed by the graphics or they're going to like the gameplay of it. And it's unique in that way.
Yeah. So, Tokaido is one of the people's picks. So I just go ahead and throw that out there. The other thing about Tokaido is this is an interesting, people talk about this game being relaxing, right? And zen-like, and other people say it's cutthroat. Where are you on that, John?
Well, it's interesting because I think what makes it relaxing is just the theme of it. Like literally one of the sections you go to, you're at the hot spring. So you're going and you're just collecting a card. I think it's relaxing in the fact that you're just making a single choice on your turn. And when you get there, you do the thing, you're happy about it. And then you might have to wait a little while for your turn. And while you're doing so, you're just kind of relaxing. But when it comes down to it, if you're trying to win, this is one of the most cutthroat games there are. You really have to watch because if you go too far ahead, you're like, I really want this one thing. I'm going to zoom over here. I'm going to take this. You could be setting somebody up for taking 3 turns in a row and they're just clean in house. So I think as far as like, if you're trying to win, it is one of the most cutthroat games you could play. If you're just enjoying the experience and not necessarily trying to eke out every point you can, I think it's a relaxing experience. So I think it really comes down to the way you play it and what you're looking to get out of it. And it depends on your group. So in some groups, it's going to be relaxing. In other groups, it's going to be like, I can't believe you did that. I hate you. Let's never play board games together again.
I agree 100%, John. I think because as he asked the question, that's exactly what I thought. If you're playing to win, it's cutthroat. If you're playing to have a good time, it's a nice, relaxing stroll through Japan, which is the theme of the game itself. So I agree 100% with that synopsis of how you feel. I also, just as a side note, I think this is the most accidentally cutthroat game I've ever played, especially when you get to higher player counts. Because there's just so many spaces, So, and if there's like 4 or 5 of you going down this trail, you're like, oh, I really want to get that. Oh, you got on it. All right. Well, I'll be happy to go over it. No, she took that. Okay, so I guess I'll go over here and get this thing. I'm not even. Nope, he took that. Guess I'm going to the inn. I'm done.
It's a game you have to be flexible in too, because you want to do a little bit of everything, but you want to kind of focus on one thing primarily. But if you do that too much, if you're just like, I need this exact kind of card, I need to get every one of them, and if I do, I'm going to get a bunch of points. And someone just saunters in, they're like, oh, what's this? I'll just take this off the shelf right here. That's nice. And that other person's over there just dying inside because they really wanted that card. So, and that's again mixed. That person's having a chill, fun time. They're just like, oh, just grab that. That's a neat little card.
Right. The other
person over there that wants to win is just like, I hate you. So you can have that cutthroat and that chill game going on at the same time in the same game. And that's what kind of makes this such a unique experience.
All right, cool. So Erock, what have you got for your number 2?
Okay, so I might have a little bit of a ramble here. So first of all, as I said, I just wanted to make sure somebody had to mention Patchwork. I appreciate that because it's going to be the foundation of my number 2. So there's a designer / company. The designer's name is Cory Goff, and he made a game called Habitats. And Habitats is a cool little game. Babe and I really like this game. And the basic core of this game is you're building kind of a zoo, I guess more of a preserve. But the point is that everything needs something next to it. So like if I play a wombat might need 3 rock spaces and a water space next to it. And I might play a shark, and a shark might need 2 water spaces and a grass next to it or something like that. So and each of them are on their own kind of terrain. So the wombat might be on, say, grass, but that doesn't count for his qualifications, just for things that you would put it next to. So it's really just this piecing together of trying to put these things next to other things. Okay. So Uwe played this game and apparently liked it a whole lot. So he reached out to Cory Goff and said, I want to mess with your game. And he said, that sounds awesome. So basically, my game is Nova Luna. And Nova Luna is the time track for picking things and the put everything next to each other mixed together into one game. And I think it's really pure, and I really like the simplicity of it. There's no theme at all. I don't even think they bothered to try to come up with a theme. Like, it's just basically squares with numbers on them. But it's the same basic concept. Instead of it being like, I need, my salamander needs 4 mountains and a water, it's, all right, this tile needs 3 blues and 2 reds next to it. And if I do that, I get to put a little chip on it. And the point of this game is first person to run out of these chips for completing these requirements on these tiles just wins the game. And I like that a lot too. I feel like that escalates this game as opposed to it just being a set number of turns or a set number of points, or I guess it is a set number of points, but instead of playing to a certain amount of points or something like that, it's just whoever puts their last chip down wins. And I like that. It makes it a race. So it makes it more of a thinky puzzle, trying to get the most you can out of your buck that you play. You know what I'm saying? So just like the rest of the time track games, the person that's farthest behind gets to choose their tile. Then that tile has a cost on it. So just like the other games, if you choose a really good tile, you're going to use a lot of time. And then it might be a while till you get another turn. But at the same time, the tile you chose might have had 3 really easy requirements on it. So I might be able to clear those off and knock 3 of my 20 pegs down right now, kind of a thing. So I just really like how this game works. Like I said, first of all, I really like Habitats. I think that's great. And I really like Patchwork. I think that's great. And somehow the 2 of these games together just made a really fantastic game. And I'm really always happy to play it. So Nova Luna.
Yeah, just hearing you talk about it now makes me want to play. I'm like, we have time before bed, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I feel like if Uwe comes along and he's like, "Hey, I want to mess with one of your games," you're just like, okay?"
You're like,
no. I mean, I get that, and I'm like, report as spam.
Yeah, it's like, stop contacting me, Uwe. Right. I've already told you no 3 times. But I do like that thing you said. One of my favorite things in board games is taking an hour and a half and you're building up and you're fighting and scratching. And at the end, you start counting. You're like, well, in this section, I did this. And these green cards, I have this. And you kind of have a build up at the end game and you kind of get to tell the story of the game you just played. And you're just like, this is what I did. And then you compare scores. But occasionally I do like that, just like, oh, I put this down, I win. Don't stop counting things. Stop counting them. It doesn't matter. I won the game. And it's over. And that's it. And it's come to a conclusion. So I do like when games do that. And it's just like you're racing for it. And when it happens, you just put all your cards on the table and it's game over.
That's it. Game over. You won or you lost. There's no arguing. There's no tiebreakers. None of that. You won or you lost.
There might still be some arguing, but
yeah, there's arguing. But it's not
dirty
cheat. It's not like Ticket to Ride where you go back and recount every route everybody has just to make sure the score's right.
Well, if you call me a cheat, I'm not going to argue. So no arguing.
All right. Well, on that note, Tiffany, do you have any comments on him? No.
How often does Erock cheat? Be honest.
Yeah, right.
She doesn't know the rules.
Wins an awful lot.
Yeah. She don't know the rules, so she has no idea. I could just be.
That's the easiest way to cheat.
Yes.
Name of the game is I win.
Be the teacher is the easiest way to cheat.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Be the teacher, be the banker, Monopoly. There's no better way.
In our friend group, Ericking the rules means you get halfway through the game and you go, oh, one more thing. I forgot to tell you. I don't know how to win, and this is how.
Yeah,
which is the opposite of what I get when I teach a lot of games, which is, you never told me that. I certainly did tell you that. You were on your phone.
Yes, exactly. That's my most hated thing. You never said that. Yes, I did. I said it 3 times. And then 3 other people at the table go, he said that.
Yeah, he said that.
Yeah. You've always got backup. There's always other people who are like,
that actually listen.
Come on. All right. Well, Tiffany, could you tell us what your number 2 is?
Yes. So we talked about it ad nauseum almost. So we don't have to talk about it anymore. But I will go another tally in the column for Tokaido. Really
crossover.
And I am in the camp of it's a fun leisurely game where you get to kind of just travel through and see the sights and get your pictures and your set collection stuff, and it's just a fun time.
Yeah, I mean, it didn't make my list as my top 2, but it's right up there. I have the version with all the painted minis in the big box, which, if you know me, is sort of a big deal. I don't like a
did
big
you get that
box
on
of
sale?
minis and stuff.
Did you find it at a thrift shop?
No, I traded somebody for it, actually, and I traded them quite a lot of stuff for it.
You're changing, though. You've got 2 giant boxes of Mad King Ludwig that are just taking up all that space.
Yeah, I think one of those isn't going to last. I don't think the giant Moats and Barbicans is going to last.
And Dark Tower, look at you.
Oh, I know. I got to do something about that.
Just put it.
Stop bringing me down, man.
This is an intervention. This video has just all been leading up to this.
Oh, is that my wife? Why my wife walked in the room? Oh, crap.
She paid
right on time.
You're being paid? Oh,
yeah.
All right.
I want to be paid.
All right. Well, cool. So that's 2, or as I said, 3 votes for Tokaido, because that was also on the people's list. But now I'll tell you my second, and then we'll get to the last of the people to pick. So my second is a game by, I guess, Formal Ferret, I guess is the name of the company, Gil Hova, who did the networks and such. And it is High Rise. So I got to play High Rise as a prototype, actually, and then I backed the Kickstarter and got a copy of the game. And I don't know, it's funny. It's a little bit reminiscent of Monopoly because there's a board you go around and there's the different squares. But in reality, the way you move around is it's a time track mechanism. You decide which property you're going to skip ahead to. And each property has some sort of special ability that it grants you, some reason you want to go there. It's either going to give you some resources or some other rule that you can break or augment or something, because ultimately what you're trying to do is you're trying to build these big buildings in the middle of the board. And you have to use these materials to build the different levels of the building. And each turn or trip around the board, I'll say round, whatever the terminology is, you play a 2 or 3 round game. It changes what buildings can be built and for how many points and what material and what order needs to be done. It's also interesting because there's this corruption mechanism. So in a lot of the slots, there's something you can do, and then also something else you can do if you take a little corruption. Or if you're in a certain region of the board, you can you can build the building in that region where your player pawn is located. And if you want to build somewhere else in one of the other regions or the city center, because nobody ever borders the city center, you have to also take corruption to do that. And corruption is interesting because corruption is bad, obviously, but it's only as bad as how much extra you have than the other players, right? So if the other players are taking corruption, you're taking corruption, it's not that big of a deal. If you're taking a bunch and somebody's not taking any, then it's a big deal. So there's this interesting corruption mechanism where you can do extra stuff. But one of the things that I think is interesting about this game as far as time track games goes is as you're moving from location to location and sort of neighborhood or borough or whatever to borough, there are these piers. And as you cross them, you get a resource. You get one of the resources on there. So the first person to go across it gets first choice. And I think the last person doesn't get anything. So it sort of incentivizes you even extra to skip ahead. Well, boy, I can build a building if I just get this one extra resource. How do I get that resource? Well, if I skip over that pier, I'll get it, and then I can build the building over here. And, as I said, ultimately, you're trying to build the tallest building because not only do you get points for that, but there's a little bit of an area control thing. Like, I control this region now because I have the tallest building or whatever. The table presence on this is great. The original sort of proposed version that they were going to do was like, you actually stack pieces together or whatever. And that was okay. But then they came out with this version with standees. So there's these tall standees and you put your base on it and they go out on the table and it really looks like a city. And the art of the, I'm not sure who the artist is. Maybe it was Kwanchai Moria. I'm not sure. Did a great job on all the facades of the buildings. So I really like the table presence of the game. And then, like I said, it's just fun to play. There are a lot of little tiny rules. So if you want to learn the game in its entirety, there's a video from the designer that's like an hour long on how to play the game. But in reality, it's not that complicated. That's just that video covers every little individual thing that, usually is something like you just reference that in the rule book when that comes up, right? Instead of needing to learn it all up front. So don't be too intimidated by it. So High Rise. Anybody else here played High Rise?
Nope.
Can't say that I have.
Yeah.
In fact, I think you might be making it up. I can't even confirm or deny.
It's had a few Kickstarters. So for to make extra bits to actually have assemblable towers and a couple of print runs or whatever. So no, I'm not making it up.
Oh, they added board games to Kickstarter?
Yeah, believe it or not.
New technology.
And there are no failed board games on Kickstarter.
No, it's never happened. It does bring an interesting point because you said when you cross the pier, you get the resources like Patchwork, but Tiffany was saying, I love when the time track games really incentivize you because in Tokaido, all the stuff's kind of good. It's just like, what are you going for? You build your own incentives. But when the game is taunting you, it's like, hey, if you spend a little bit of extra time over here, you can get this big reward. So I really like that because you're making a decision. Do I stick with what I'm doing? Oh, I think someone just moved out ahead of me. Are they going to try to grab that bonus? And it really adds that extra layer to it. So it sounds like an interesting game for sure.
Yeah.
If it exists.
If this game that's in your head. Maybe we can call Uwe and he can make it for you.
Hey, yeah. Well, he'll
That's
just
a good idea.
ignore it, go to spam anyway.
You might be able to play it on Tabletop Simulator or Tabletopia or something. I can't remember.
I'm sure it's out there somewhere.
But talking about a game that really just makes you want to skip ahead to take something, but then makes you not want to do that either, is the people's second choice behind Tokaido was Glen More. And in the poll, I lumped Glen More and Glen More 2 together. So I've actually never played Glen More 2, but I think it still just builds on the basic mechanisms of Glen More. So in Glen More, you are trying to increase the territory of your Scottish clan. And you do that with the time track. So all the different tiles that you can add to your territory are on the time track. And so if you want to, just take one, just jump a little bit and take that one. Some of them you actually have to pay for. They have resources on them. You have to pay for them. But otherwise, you just take it and you build it into your territory. And when you place it into your territory, it has this interesting puzzle in that when you place a tile, you activate that tile, but then you activate every tile around it orthogonally and diagonally. So but you can only place tiles into your area that are next to the people from your clan. So you have these little meeples that you need to position around so that you can place things next to them so you can activate those other things. But then also you can sort of promote those meeples to chieftains, and then they're worth points if you do that. But then you have less places you can place stuff. But there are definitely always tiles that, because, every time you take a tile, a new one comes out at the end. And there's always, and they're getting progressively better, right? So it starts with sort of the starter tiles, and then the 1 tiles, and then the 2 tiles and the 3 tiles come out. And so it always feels like there's some new tile that's been added to the end, and you're like, I need that. Or that would be perfect right here, because I can put it right here. It's going to activate that and that and that, and it does this thing, and that's great. But then it's so far along. And if you're playing this at, the max player count, which I can't remember if it's 4 or 5, it's probably 5 if I own the game. So you can look at a tile and it be, 4, 5, 6 ahead of you, and that's pretty far ahead. So you don't want to jump that far. But if you don't jump that far and take that tile, and you just say, maybe take the next one in order that's maybe decent, 3 or 4 other people are going, and now you get to the person who's right before you, and that tile that you really wanted is now maybe just a 1 or 2 jump for them. So that's not so big of a sacrifice. So they might do that. So you really do have to look at this board and go, man, I am going to jump ahead 6, aren't I? And this guy's going to get 2 turns before I get to go again. So, you're gambling a little bit, like maybe they won't take it, or you just jump ahead and then you just stew while everybody does their turns, Yeah. And so this, that's what's great about Time Track, right? It has to sort of evoke those feelings, because I have played some Time Track games where it just felt like, well, people just took the next thing, right? And because you just deal with it. There are a lot of games you just deal with it. Like Carcassonne, you draw a tile out of the bag, you just deal with what you got, right? And some games like this, they feel so punishing if you move too far ahead that you might as well just take the next thing. Like, sure, the next thing is okay. This other thing is better, but it's too far along. So I'll just take the okay thing and deal with it. And so I don't like it when Time Track games play out like that. I like Time Track games where people are pretty frequently, I mean, not all the time, not constantly, but pretty frequently just jumping ahead a few spaces to get that thing that is sort of perfect for what their strategy is. So anyway, Glen More evokes that for me, as does High Rise and Kraftwagen, and a little bit to a lesser extent Tokaido, because Tokaido is really punishing to skip ahead like John. You
don't want to do it. It'll lose. It is interesting because the whole genre is kind of, if you're prone to AP, it's probably not a genre you're going to enjoy because there's no right answer. Jumping ahead 6, it's daunting and it's costly, but that might be the right answer. There's no way to math it out. You just kind of got to feel craft it. You just got to go, I feel like this is the right thing, and go for it and see what happens on it. But it's interesting.
Yeah, for sure. Especially because it's related to the other people's actions. So jumping ahead might be the right thing to do, unless nobody goes that far. And then you're like, that was dumb. Why did I jump that far ahead? But at the same time, if the same people go and grab things too, then you're like, man, I'm glad I got it when I did. So I think it has a lot to do with the environment that you play in as well.
Yeah, it's Schrodinger's turn. You don't know what's going to happen. So you collapse the lay function and see what happens next.
Even if you did jump ahead and nobody else jumps over you, that's not to say somebody else wouldn't have taken that one tile.
That's true.
Really
they might have only crawled ahead because they wanted that tile that you took. And so why bother?
Yeah, so not only is there not a right answer, but when you look back at the game and do a postmortem, you still don't know if you made the right decision or not. It's just so many variables.
Sometimes everybody made the wrong decision. When Tiffany's like, I'll take this free goldfish and this free goldfish and this free goldfish. Look, I'm getting 4 turns in a row, suckers.
But it is interesting that there's hundreds of thousands of board games at this point, and there's mechanics like this, and I split you choose and stuff like that. And that's why I really like this series of Gaming Through the Mechanisms, because you get to see a lot of these lesser utilized mechanisms that are only in like 0.001% of board games, but they make for a unique experience. So it's a really cool system, and I try to find Time Track games whenever I can, because it's always a unique feeling to each one of those, and it's one you don't get in a typical worker placement / strategy game.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite mechanisms. When we were brainstorming about what videos we're going to make Gaming Through Mechanisms for, in the beginning, and I was like, "Ooh, we got to do Time Track. That's one of my favorites." And Lloyd's like, "What the hell is that?"
Right.
So I think I get that a lot. First of all, when I say time track, pretty much everybody's like, what the heck is that? And then when you describe it, people are like, maybe I've seen that. And you go like, like Tokaido. And they're like, oh.
Or Patchwork, right?
Yeah. Well, I always say Tokaido is my example. But yeah, Patchwork would probably work. What would work?
Would Patchwork.
Plus, I think this is one of the only mechanisms that makes me wish it was in other games. And like, because there's a lot of games where there's just like, I don't know, a line or a circle or something, and you go clockwise. And after playing this kind of game, I'm like, why didn't they make it like that? Why didn't they make it last player goes? That adds such another interesting layer to what's going on here, so just my observation.
Yeah, unfortunately, the AP that it adds may be too much for some games too. But.
Yeah, that's true. Especially because, like John said and you guys were talking about, there's no right answer. You don't know. So that drives the AP people crazy because you can't math it out. There is no X equals what? I don't know. X equals Y. What is Y? I don't know. So, yeah.
All right, cool. Well, that is Gaming Through Mechanisms, the time track mechanism. I'm Steve. That's Tiffany. That's Erock. That's John. We're from Just Got Played. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up. Subscribe if you want to see more of these. And if you are interested in talking to us about board games or voting in the People's Poll, look in the links down below. There's our Facebook group where we do polls. We also talk about games on Discord. And there's other social media channels where you can follow us. But until next time, thanks for joining us.
Bye. Have a nice night.